We're not bead experts, but we got to have a couple in the room that will be able to help out on some of these things too. And we have some great beads that were brought in today too. So Debbie's going to start off here.
When I first started, I thought, oh, this is going to be easy. Well, no way, because it's a lot of identification, a lot of classification systems. But it was a wonderful, colorful, and fascinating. And I'm going to take you now into the world of beads. We'll start off by the history of beads. Here in particular, the reason I put this up is the oldest beads found and documented were 110,000 years before present. Two types of beads, natural materials we just spoke about, shells, seeds, stone, bones, even I found out even quills, porcupine quills could be added to this list. So anything that the Native Americans found within their environment that they found interesting or colorful, and they were able to use these as making beadwork or decorations, they utilized it. We always thought that wampum meant money. Before I became working with the archaeologists, I always thought wampum meant money. Well, I'm finding out more on the research side, it wasn't. That the wampum was actually used to express a story or tell a story. For example, on the bottom here, there's what they call a wampum belt. It's a reproduction of the belt representing the union of the 4 eastern states. And it's basically made from the quahog clam. It's a hard shell clam, and the only colors being purple and white. Apparently, now in some of the other local sites, they said that there's some shell beads. They were used as trade items, not necessarily money. So there's some discrepancies whether wampum was used very early as a form of money, but they all did agree that once they had a contact period, once that contact period came, that they no longer used these as actual wampum as a form of money. They actually used it to perhaps ratify treaties, make a record of important events and things like that. This is very interesting too, the different ways to make glass. And there's 110 million different ways of making glass. But they're talking here about the old methods of how they did the glass making in Venice. Basically, you could read this slide. They're taking basically sand, the silica in the sand. You are combining it with various natural elements like sodium bicarbonate, baking soda. They're also taking some type of salt, some type of sodium. Maybe they'll throw in some cobalt or some other natural elements. And they heat this up. And then what happens is when it heats up, it denatures it. And it fuses this into glass, and upon cooling, it changes the molecular structure, and you get glass. That's basically it in a nutshell. Now, from the chemical composition, how do you make this round bead? Well, there's one method, is they talked about this tube method. A glass blower would take this big glob of glass, blow into it, and then he'd have another assistant come, and he would attach a rod to the end of that glass. And that assistant would run down the corridor, stretching out this tube of glass. They let it cool, they cut it in 1 meter each, and then after they cut that into pieces, then they started cutting into smaller pieces, where they had someone there cutting and scoring these little things, and then chopping them off, okay? Then, once these beads were chopped up, they had a lot of rough edges. So what they did is they put them in a tumbler with, I believe it was sand, carbon, and water, and heat was applied to that. And a tumbler was actually moving all these beads around into the slurry, where everything started to take off the rough edges around the beads. The next step was they took these beads and they put it in a shaker with fermented bran. Don't ask me why they put fermented bran, that's interesting, but it was actually acting as a polishing agent. And then this is how you got these beads to be very clean and smooth. This is our coveted bead. This is what everybody wants, and I see we have some beautiful beads here. These are called chevron beads or star beads. Now this is a whole different process. This was like the most important processing at the time, and they were called the winding method. And what they would do is they would take, again, this long globular glass, blow into it, and then they would take the glass and start winding it around this rod. They'd let that cool a little bit, then they would do the next layer, and the next layer, and the next layer. I do remember that chevron beads will have up to 7 different layers on that particular rod. And that was so much coveted because that was so much harder to do. Nobody did multifaceted or multicolored beads like people in Murano. That was like the best. This is Tom's slide. He brought this collection here. You could, after we're finished, you could come back up and take a look at that. This is a little bit blown up, and this is beautiful. Tom has a fabulous collection. Everything is noted here, mostly from all the different sites locally. Different shell beads, you have glass, you have cobalt, you have melon beads, all sorts. You have, I believe these are brass. Excellent quality collection here. These are photos from Gary Fogelman. Gary Fogelman, when I started doing bead research, we have them all up here, there's different booklets, and he has a beautiful chart of different types of beads. It's not that easy to ID these beads because you're starting to get into the real nitty-gritty. And so you see these long beads over here, they look like licorice sticks. Tom just filled me in that they used to be called hair pipes, where they would actually use them as a hair ornament. And in Gary Fogelman's books, they were used as, he calls them licorice beads. Okay? We talked here about Fenstermacher. A lot of you are familiar with who Fenstermacher is. He was a local archaeologist who did a lot of excavating in our area. And he has different charts that we have here. He has, I have copies of his booklets. You can take a look at that. This will also help you identify the types of beads that you might have. Again, Gary Fogelman with his glass beads. Why were the trade beads so quickly accepted by the Native Americans? And the answer is because the Native Americans had a history of beads. They already had their natural shells, they had their natural stone beads. So to them, when they saw this strand of beads, well, to them, that was the latest fashion. That was something new. That's like us getting a new iPod. All the little tiny seed beads that we have, they would be stringing those along, and they call those seed beads little spirit gifts. They thought each little bead was a little spirit, and they enjoy these little spirits. And it said that they would be in a circle, they would have this great communion, they would be camaraderie with their fellow Native American, and it says that the energy from this little communal circle would flow well. It said it would flow out really good energy. So with that last thought in mind, I'm going to let this good energy flow over to President Niven, and I'm going to let him do the hardest part, which is going to be bead identification. So I hope you enjoyed the presentation, and thank you for your attention. You're a very good audience. Thank you.
I wanted to bring this down to the local level, and I'm not going to be nearly as detailed as Debbie was, but this is a really nice guide. It comes along with his identification chart, and I have a detail of the chart up on the screen there. But I opened up this book to start identifying some beads, and when you do that, it becomes quite intimidating because there's just page after page. There's probably a couple thousand identification numbers for various different kinds of beads.
A and B.
Here's some of Charlie's too.
Yeah, that's fine.
He has that one red, white, and blue one. Where is that?
Okay, and I
That thing is
Brought us a
awesome.
couple,
They're all Charlie's.